My name is Dr. Mi-yeon Oh. I'm the director and senior faculty lead for the Korea Studies here at SAIS Johns Hopkins. And I hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving, and would like to thank everyone for coming to the event right after the holidays and break. So it is my honor and pleasure to welcome Dr. Ki-jung Kim, Kim Ki-jung here, the president of the Institute for National Security Strategy, INSS, from South Korea to our campus today. INSS is a public research institute whose missions are to analyze ever-changing regional international security landscape around Northeast Asia and also the Korean Peninsula, and make policy recommendations on those issues for the government of the Republic of Korea. Dr. Kim is a tenured faculty member at Yonsei University, also my alma mater, and really has a long standing career in academic and also policy areas, and including a lot of publications, books, and articles, and also including the poetry. And I really would like to proudly say that he's one of the key behind-the-scene architects, really advising the Blue House in terms of the Korean Peninsula policy, denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. So I think we're really lucky to have him today to hear his insight about the way forward. So without the further ado, I'd like to really welcome him and ask him to bring him to the stage and to begin the lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Oh. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Ki-jung Kim. Thank you for the wonderful introduction about me. I arrived in DC yesterday. Whenever I visit the DC, I realize the second day is the toughest day. This time is at 3 o'clock in the morning, and so. Today, I'd like to share some ideas about the South Korean foreign policy, and maybe 4 different themes, or my lecture consists of 4 different things. One is a brief history of South Korean foreign policy, and second part is divided status of the Korean Peninsula, and how the South Korean government and the South Korean people, how to the people try to view and deal with this divided status of the Korean Peninsula. And then the third topic would be what is current stage of the so-called peace initiative of the Moon Jae-in government since the 2017. And the last topic, if we have time, that I'd like to share some ideas about future of the South Korean foreign policy. Yeah, there's South Korean foreign policy for the next generation. Well, what kind of images can you imagine? Can you pop up in your brain? That this is the satellite pictures on Northeast Asia, including the Korean Peninsula. Maybe some of you have different ideas, but to Koreans, this kind of word sandwich, Korean Peninsula seems to be sandwiched by the surrounding bigger neighbors. Sometimes we say that we have a beautiful country with a beautiful river, but we have bad neighbors, the bigger neighbors, and so according to the Korean old words, that weak, innocent shrimp can be easily burst among the big whales fight. So innocent bystander can easily hurt by the the big powers fight. So sometimes we see we have a self-portrait of the Koreans as a weak shrimp. And then maybe this same idea, we can say that Koreans are, sometimes we feel that we are entrapped by the bigger powers competitions. So this is a brief history of Koreans international relations. This is how the Koreans memorize our old experience since the 19th century. I think that the first words that the Koreans that we whenever we think of our experience in since the late 19th century is that Korea became victims or the victimized by the bigger powers competition, especially during the late 19th century, that when the imperialist powers tried to invade Korean Peninsula. The Korean Peninsula was regarded as some kind of a sensitive region, to the neighboring countries because it is located between the continental power and the maritime power. So the peninsula is like this. So China regarded Korea. It is. The Chinese regarded it as Korean Peninsula as like relationship between teeth and lips. When you hurt the lips, your teeth will be also vulnerable. And Japan seems, Japanese people that Korean Peninsula and its geopolitical meaning of the peninsula to the Japan is that like pointing a sword to the heart of Japan, to the heart of island Japan. So Koreans, in practice as well as in memory, that maybe the first word whenever we think of our experience and memories is that we're victim of the great power struggles in the region. As a result, Korea became colonized by Japan in 1910, and it was 1945 that Korea was liberated as a result of this, the Pacific War. But as soon as Korea was liberated, Korea was divided into two parts. And in it was 1945, but in 1948, 3 years later, officially, two different governments were established, ROK and the DPRK. But 2 years later, there was a war, Korean War. Still, it is, prolonged. It is an unending, war. Is ongoing on the Korean Peninsula. So since the end of Korean War, there is still, the maybe 70 or more years of, divided status of Korean Peninsula. Maybe the one word would be, confrontation between North and South Korea. So it's like, weak shrimp can be easily burst by the big whales fight. So sometimes we see that during the Cold War, Northeast Asia as a region, as regional politics of Northeast Asia, there was also antagonistic balance of power has been maintained. But in that kind of antagonistic balance of power has been possible because of the divided status, because of the confrontational relations between North and South Korea. So we call it Northern Triangle with PRC, North Korea, and the USSR on the Northern Triangle, and the Southern Triangle, US, Japan, and South Korea. So it is still we are suffering from that kind of legacy. And the main reason why we're going to remind of this northern lateral, the southern lateral, is that many people think and describe the current international relations not only in the global stage, but also in East Asia. Maybe in the near future that international politics would enter into another new Cold War. If new types of Cold War happen in Northeast Asia, Koreans are deeply worried about that. Another, the front line of that confrontation would be on the Korean Peninsula. So, this is the military demarcation line. I spent 2 years actually as a platoon leader to defend this, wired, demarcation line from 1979 to 1980s. So this is some words that I'd like to share there. Our experience in terms of foreign policy. During the late 19th century, Korea tried to use other power to check one power to another power. So we call it, this is a balancing power, balancing strategy. But in the balance of power on the Korean Peninsula in the late 19th century failed because there was not the balance of power. We perceive that that balance of power is not actual definition of balance of power. There was a balance of aggression. There was a balance of oppression to Koreans. Balancing diplomacy has another side of coin. We call it neutrality. Actually, Korean government declared neutrality even before the outbreak of the Russo-Japanese War in 1904. But no major powers acknowledged it. There was neglected, actually. So we failed. In terms of foreign policy strategy, there was nothing was successful. So, Korea was colonized by Japan, and then during the times of a Korean provisional government, the only thing that we should do is that struggle for the independence. Right after the Korean War, the South Korean foreign policy can be summed up as alliance. It was very much successful for the for providing security of the South Korea. And then during the export-oriented industrialization period, there was also foreign policy, not only in practice but also in strategy. Foreign policy also worked, and then also South Korean government has suggested to the neighboring countries to make some peaceful environment on the regional politics, with the many times, including that recently we suggest to the concept of community of responsibility community. So these are the short history. Korean Peninsula, it is, to the divided South, South Korea. It's like, it was, South Korea was disconnected from the continent. So it was a lone island. It is not island, it is peninsula, but it was, for the, South Korea, it was regarded as an island. Once it was the poorest country in the 1960s, 1950s and 60s, but during the late second half of 20th century, Korea and the Koreans showed amazing story of a success, including industrialization and the people's struggle for the democracy. And many Koreans are feeling that now we are ready to enter into a center stage of the world
politics, because it is now we enjoy the ninth biggest economy and the sixth ranking on the military capability. Can you hear about the 30-40 club? The 30 a country has over 50 million population with 30,000 of GDP, per capita. So it is a 30-40 club. All over the world, there was 7 countries. South Korea became the 7th member of the 30-50 club. But amazing thing to note is that South Korea is the only country who experienced the colonization period. So far, it has been very successful performance against the COVID-19 crisis. And the K culture, maybe you are familiar with this, Squid Games and the Blackpink. Yes, K culture is now very popular and global stage. Koreans feeling that popularity of K culture seems to pave the way that we are going into the center stage of the world of politics. And then maybe we should do in the future from now is that we should design foreign policy of a more sophisticated way and with more creativity. Second part that I like to share some idea is that the divided status. Maybe this is the concept of during the last 70 or more years of divided status of Korean Peninsula, mostly A and B types, militant confrontation strategy during the 1950s and 60s, and antagonistic but in a mutual dependent strategy toward North Korea. There was in 1980s and 90s, but occasionally there were peaceful coexistence strategy was adopted by the three different governments: Kim Dae-jung government, and the Roh Moo-hyun government, and the current Moon Jae-in government. So the basic idea is that it's like this: from A and B types, we like to move to C types of the management strategy of the divided status of Korean Peninsula. Maybe in the future, we don't know when, but in integration strategy between North and South Korea would be possible, but we don't know when. Historical meaning of the peace initiative, as I said, that the antagonistic front, confrontational order should be, or even confrontational interdependence order should be, transformed into the peaceful coexistence on the Korean Peninsula. Why is that? Because we have spent too many costs for this, divided, Korea. So we like to overcome the concept of island, and we like to connect to the continent, and we like to build another wider range of connectivity, to the world and to the south. So recently we are searching we are practicing the new northern policy as well as the new southern policy. These are the key concepts of the peace initiative. So I'd like to share some ideas about conceptual map of the so-called peace initiative. There are two different dimensions whenever we think of our strategy, how to handle, how to manage of the Korea and the Korean, the peaceful future. One is international politics, international dimensions. South Korea-US alliance is one aspect of international dimension. North Korea, US, there was also international dimension. North Korea-Chinese relations, international. But in inter-Korean relations, we call it intranational relations. So there should be a combination. I mean, there were a dual aspect of the international as well as intranational, dimension on the Korean Peninsula. Second concept is that that nation state, the term, which is the key concept of the modern international politics since the 17th century, nation state is not complete on the Korean Peninsula. So from the view of the South Korea, when we see the North Korea, or even when we perceive the divided status Korean Peninsula, there are two different concepts, two different perspectives. One is nation-centered perspective. Second is a state-centered perspective. When you apply this state-centric perspective, it is like ROK and the DPRK. They are competing. There have been, two different states are, competing for the less than 70 years. But in a nation-centric perspective, it's like we don't care about Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, or Kim Jong-un. We only care about the people who are residing on northern part of the Korean Peninsula. So when we apply that perspective, when he explained our strategy, that the humanitarian assistance to North Korean people is necessary. So these are two different dimensions, two different dichotomy when we see that the North Korea, but unfortunately in the South Korean society, it became a source of a social and a political conflict during the last 20 or 25 years. It became a source of ideological polarization within South Korean society. So some people call it is a South and South conflict. So this government tried to suggest a third way is that, well, still nation-centric versus state-centric is still, controversial is still going on. But we need a third approach to solve these conflictual problems. That is, we call it market-centric perspective. North Korea is our enemy. We should deter, the provocation. But in the people, in the North Korea, it's the same nation, same people. But at the same time, North Korea is a very much important market to us. So this is a market-centric perspective. Another key concept by which we can explain the peace initiative is that peace initiative, not only in theory, but in a real practice of the politics, there are many ways to achieve the peace. One is a realistic peace, including the deterrence, alliance, or self-strengthening strategy. These are the realistic peace. Second part is arms control approach. Because this is an eclectic concept of the peace. Third one is a liberalist peace. As I said, market or capitalist peace or even institutional peace is already a part of this liberalist peace. Since the last 4 years, we try to maintain the realist peace very strongly, with a very strong stance. And in 2018, there was a military agreement between North and South Korea in September, 2018. There was a very initial stage of the arms control between North and South Korea. Still, we have many things to do. But in the liberalist peace, we did not have any chance to apply this concept of peace to to North Korea. So it is unfulfilled so far. Maybe somebody was asked that where is the denuclearization of North Korea? Officially, denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Denuclearization is a very much important task too. Yes, we have to acknowledge it. But conceptually speaking, there are two different ways to carry out this denuclearization. Thing is that how to combine with the peace approach and the denuclearization. There are two different things. One is peace through denuclearization. Second concept is that denuclearization through peace. So far, this first one, peace through denuclearization, has been, even though it is very limited, but it's working. Washington seems to be interested in that approach. South Korea, we support that idea, peace through denuclearization. But South Korean government feels that that is not the only way to achieve peace and denuclearization. We believe, so far, we have a belief that peaceful coexistence environment of the, peaceful environment on the Korean Peninsula. If we successfully induce North Korea to our, commitment of the responsibility, that maybe we could possibly accelerate of Kim-jong-un's regime to pass through those, some points toward the denuclearization. So we try to combine these two things, these two concepts. Peace through denuclearization has been major approach. I think that Washington is only interested in that approach. Yes, we support that idea too, but the problem things is that if the peace through denuclearization is the only way, we have to wait until the bilateral talk conclude between North Korea and the United States. So for the South Korean part, we should do something more. And another problem of that approach only is, peace through denuclearization, is that if we applied this peace through denuclearization could be regarded as something precondition, or even denuclearization should be put on the outset of the road, entrance of the road. So it is very much time-consuming things. So far, we have spent 5 years, and we are approaching the final years, final month of the Moon Jae-in government. We don't know what would be, who would succeed that Moon Jae-in government's space initiative. But in 2017, we describe, if we describe with one word, what happened in 2017, it was full of a crisis, including North Korea's missile test, and nuclear test. 2018 was a year of hope. We described that springtime of the Korean Peninsula has come. But in that hope turned out to be a patience. We have waited and waited because there was, in the same year, 2019, maybe you can recall that there was a no deal at Hanoi between North Korea and the United States, Kim Jong-un and Trump. But even though there was a no deal, there was no result of the bilateral talk, but we have waited until officially there was a Stockholm meeting in, I guess it was in November in the same year, that there should be no more talk. There was official announcement of that, both sides. So it was a year of patience. 2020, actually South Korea designed some kind of a breakthrough because we believe that, U.S. North Korean bilateral talk is like a front wheel of the, car. North and South Korean inter-Korean talk is like a rear wheel of the car. So until the 2017, 18, and 19, that the car could be moved forward because of that, front wheel talk would be possible. But we realized that maybe it is time to change from front wheel drive to rear wheel drive. So we tried to resume some kind of talk with North Korea sometime in early 2020, but it was aborted. It was aborted last year. It was aborted in this year because of COVID-19. So we have only 5 months left. But in this initiative, this idea would be succeeded. I believe that it was not only the idea of Moon Jae-in government, but it is idea of Korean peoples who are living nowadays on the Korean Peninsula. So we try to make some sustainable, workable, something, mechanism by which we can manage this struggle, full of struggle, the Korean Peninsula in a more peaceful way. We have a very short of time. So, but there are things, something exposed the problems during the stalemate between North Korea and the United States. Top-down approach only would be a problem. It should be combined with a top-down approach and bottom-up approach. These two things should be creatively combined. End of the World Declaration. Maybe you may recall that 2018, when the end of the World Declaration became a political issue, somebody was deeply concerned with it. It would be a symbol, beginning of withdrawal, possibility of a withdrawal of the U.S. forces from South Korea, and I think that there was an over-politicized issue in 2018. Now we are going to reactivate without that, over-politicized, situation. But it does not. We believe it is end of world declaration is a political declaration. It is a political signal by which we can resume the talk. Eventually until the peace regime. Eventually until they make some diplomatic normalization between North Korea and the United States. Maybe 10 years from now, or 15 years from now. So point of no return from Kim Jong-un. It was still. We cannot set up any so far there was 2 points. There was a successful point, 2 points of no returns. One is a Panmunjom, second is a Singapore. When we designed a third point of no return for Kim Jong-un. Point of no return is irreversible point, in terms of North Korea's commitment of the denuclearization. But in the third one, we failed. Lack of consensus about the denuclearization. Denuclearization is a long political process. We should recall that concept. And also, there are many misunderstanding and confusion about the concept of engagement. Engagement is like a framework that we could induce North Korea to the framework of responsibility, framework of framework of the commitment. But some people would say this engagement as rewarding something to North Korea. Rewarding is only a part of engagement strategy. North Korea today, I think we see that after the Hanoi no deal, we see that there are two different groups within the North Korean politics. Even though North Korea is a very much unique country that the decision-making structure is just highly centralized. But nevertheless, we assume that there was also a discussion or even a certain kinds of debating about how to run the North Korea as a state. We see that maybe this is the name that I chose. That there was two different groups. Is that one is a security groups. Security groups idea is like this: no nuclear, no survival. There's mostly military people are interested in that idea. But in a development group, maybe it is a time to change the national strategy from the nuclearization and economic development of North Korea. Maybe Kim Jong-un seems interested in an idea in 2018, obviously. So there is still debating. Oh, this one maybe you should know that when we see the bilateral structure, the structure of the bilateral talk between North Korea and the United States, we see as the third party to observe this bilateral talk is that sometimes psychology or even emotion seems to overwhelm or override over that expected interest. North Korea seems to be under the stress of North Korea is very much fearful of. They are afraid of U.S. forces, strong forces. In the Washington and the United States, I think that the Americans' perception on the North Korean people, North Korean regime is that it's mostly demonization of North Korea. That is a very much a sentimental approach rather than, expected benefit. How to deal with North Korea? I think that North Korea's big concern is two different things. One is survival, second is economic development. And maybe we should design some kind of a strategy if we want to deal with effectively with North Korea. Maybe it is the right words or not, but in a strategic generosity would be necessary. And Kim Jong-un's search for the irreversible structure within the North Korean domestic politics is also needed. And the war declaration as outset strategy, it is a big signal for resuming dialogues between ROK and DPRK and the US and DPRK. And I think it would be a good idea to build very initial stage for further, the trust building between the two countries. And then I think that the end of the world declaration will not suspend anything about sovereignty of South Korea, or even, effectiveness of alliance, or even the existence of a UNC. UNC matter would be determined not by this end of war declaration, but by when we conclude that the peace treaty, which officially ends the Korean War. So as I said, end of war declaration would be a political declaration for the historical transition from the war, which became unknowingly prolonged. From now, maybe next several months or next some years, coming years, that we should design. Bottom line is the South Korean government, whoever comes for the, next to the President Moon. But in the South Korean government should have a full consultation with Washington. But the basic idea is like this. We should design a certain strategy which can resolve the basic, fundamental problems of North Korea. Maybe that was the way that we can induce North Korea to our setting of the commitment. So I think that North Korea has two major concerns. One is security, one is economic security. Regime security and the economic security of North Korea. These are the two basic ideas. And each phases of the setting up the solving for the regime security as well as economic security, every phase of the road should be connected with the phase of a denuclearization. Well, this is the last part. Any lessons from historic experience of Korean people about the future of the South Korean foreign policy? Never want to repeat as a victim of the regional politics. South Korea want to unshakable country in the regional policy in Northeast Asia. And we like to contribute to the establishment of a regional peace rather than confrontation or regional order. In terms of a self-portrait, that we like to project ourselves as a normal shrimp, weak shrimp, but in a smart dolphin, And also, Koreans want to feel the pride and cultivate the self-esteem as a global leader in the culture. So I think that the many Koreans in the South want to talk about the new future and the new paradigms of South Korean foreign policy. So maybe it is time to design and think and propagate to the people outside. From compliance, from passive to creatively proactive stance and attitude would be necessary. And we like to have and share the responsibility as the new global power. And Koreans want to have foreign policy should be work for making Korea is a more beautiful country. Maybe you might recall that Kim Gu, one of the, the great political leaders, right after the Korea was liberated in 1945, he made a speech in 1947. The country I want my country to be the most beautiful in the world, not the most wealthy or the most powerful, because I ever felt the pain of being invaded by another country. I do not want my country to invade others. It is sufficient that our wealth makes our lives abundant and our strength to be able to prevent foreign invasions. The only thing I wish for in infinite quantity is the power of the noble culture. That was the Kim Gu projected the future of the Korea as a country. So final things, conclusion is that new strategy for the new paradigm. South Korea always has been working as try to perform as a peace facilitating strategy. I think it is a logical, understandable interpretation that whenever we think of peace in the Northeast Asia as a region, peace in the Northeast Asia cannot be possible without peace on the Korean Peninsula. So we like to perform something, facilitating peace on the in the region. So with a new power, economy, military, and the diplomacy, we South Korea want to discuss that we like to search for more room for the diplomatic maneuverability, to beyond the stricture. So something maybe it is a new idea of pivoting strategy would be one, or a minilateral 3 or 4 groups of cooperation will be necessary. So far, bilateral alliance with the United States has been very much successful. But maybe in the future, we cannot abandon, we cannot give up, bilateral alliance with the U.S. But in maybe we foresee the future, in coming future, that this bilateral alliance should be combined with certain types of multilateral security, architecture of the Northeast Asia. Still, we like to continue to enhance our connectivity to the outside world, to the north, to the south. New northern policy and the new southern policy should be expanded in the future. Finally, with Japan, neighboring countries, but I'd like to have more time to talk about it now. But still, we are having some diplomatic difficulties with Japan. But in looking at the long run, that we means that South Korea as well as the Japanese intellectuals, Japanese people should think together about how to design the post-1965 framework between South Korea and Japan. That would determine the future of Northeast Asia. So this is the end of my lecture. It is more time than I expected. So it's about 10 minutes left for the Q&A. I'd like to, any question, any comment? Yes, please.
Hi, my name's Jen. I agree with you that the ideological inertia is a big obstacle in this issue, but I think the ideological inertia exists in the US, Korea, and North Korea. And I was wondering, and I think the biggest obstacle for Korea to kind of pivot strategy is the fact that they have to align with Washington's strategy. And Washington has the ideological inertia of characterizing North Korea as the enemy state for so long, and the demonization that you pointed out isn't really changing in the near future. And I think that's why a lot of people addressing the North Korean issue within Washington get almost frustrated about like hitting a block, because it's for now seems really difficult for the U.S. to change that stance of peace through denuclearization. So I was wondering if you had like any objectives or ideas to address that to almost start changing the dialogue about the demonization of North Korea within Washington.
How do you talk those help? Because of the nowadays, COVID-19 days that we, with masks that communication, I have some hearing problems.
So, so the question was, the Washington D.C. seems to have their own ideological idea about what North Korea is, including demonization of DPRK. So, is there any way the ROK would approach to change, or is there any way you can have a dialogue to address that issue of DPRK view? I mean, Washington D.C. viewing DPRK in a certain way.
So we need, when, I don't know whether you can agree, my concept of strategy. Strategy is like designing the future. When we design or when we think, speak of the future, we need some kind of imagination and creativity. Rearrangement of the, policy priority. Maybe we should talk, and we should discuss for the South Korean government to come, for the from the next May, March. There going to be a presidential election. I think that next government would be more concentrated on how to consult or how how to operate of a full consultation with the U.S., but in a more focusing is that U.S. priority, United States foreign policy priority is a wide range of the domains. But in South Korea, we have a very narrow and more focused. So if we are ally, Seoul and South Korea, Seoul and Washington, maybe that priority in foreign policy should be rearranged, realigned. Maybe that would be necessary. And then when we, as I said, when we create creative idea about the future, that as I mentioned that I understand the Americans have bad feelings and bad experience about North Koreans' behavior. We do, so do we, But we don't. Strategy is not the matter of like it or not, like or dislike. Strategy is about how to gain the more interest, So psychology should be controlled by the expectation about the coming interest or expected interest. Thing is like this: divided Korea. Peaceful coexistence. Korean Peninsula with a peaceful coexistence would guarantee more interest to the neighboring countries, including U.S., than
the divided states of the Korean Peninsula. So it is a priority would be rearranged, and we need some kind of certain degrees of imagination.
Hi, my name is Kisa, and first of all, thank you. You had briefly mentioned perhaps looking at the unification problem set through a market-centric perspective, and I was hoping if you could explain that further, because the way I understood it is perhaps a gradual integration of the two economies, but if there's no market in North Korea, or if it's very, very tightly controlled, then how does the two economies integrate and support the unification process in that way?
They are expecting when during the COVID-19 situation, North Korea is suffering from economic difficulties. Next year will mark the 10th anniversary of a Kim-jung regime. Economic situation, economic condition was as low as 10 years ago. So it's maybe 10 years of loss. They need more opportunity. Look at the 5 or 6 years ago that within the North Korean state, North Korean society, there was a very small scale of a market that has also emerged. So they are expecting, the new market economy, not exactly the same kind of a market economy that we can talk, but in North Korea is also searching for some kind of interest from the market. The market-centered perspective is like this. If we share a market with North Korea, if we share a market interest in the market, maybe by which we can induce North Korea to the framework of expected interest. And also market-centric perspective is like this. If we successfully make that North Korea is sharing interest from the market, maybe security sensitivity could be minimized. Then maybe our cost for the, cost from the divided Korea would be minimized. So that is the basic idea of the market-centered perspective. Maybe you might recall in 2018 when the Panmunjom summit meeting between North and South Korea. Can you recall that President Moon Jae-in had a conversation with Kim Jong-un for the 30 minutes without any company? I later knew that what kind of topics do you talk to the Kim Jong-un? 100% economy. 100% topic was that economic issues of North Korea and the possibility of economic cooperation between the North and South Korea.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. My question kind of goes along with Jen's previous question. Even though South Korea and the US are allies, there's no guarantee that their goals and interests would 100% align. And when that happens, especially if at least a part of South Korea's strategy towards North Korea depends on bilateral engagement, the outcome of that engagement between US and North Korea, and kind of a lot of reactive policies based on what the U.S. does or U.S. stands towards North Korea. So when the interests between the U.S. and South Korea do diverge, how much freedom do you see South Korea have to proactively take some initiatives on its own, and how much of that is kind of, I guess, like would be limited by the alliance with the U.S.?
You mean, South Korea's own room for the, maneuverability? It's possible, because we've been, as I said, military alliance with the U.S. has been very much successful, not only for South Korea, but also for the U.S., foreign policy too, But these are two different, sovereign states. Since the conclusion of the military alliance in 1954, it's almost 7 years, wherein no government in South Korea would, South Korea would escape from that framework of the bilateral alliance. No government. So far, it's been very successful for the South Korean security. But bottom line is that there are two different sovereign states. So, when the South Korea is designing the new paradigms or new foreign policy, we are still, it is very limited, but still searching for some kind of, maneuvering room. But diplomatically speaking, full consultation with ally, that was necessary. And one more thing, maybe that can help you. Last May, President Moon visited Washington D.C. and he had a summit meeting with President Biden. There was 5 months ago. No, it was 7 months ago. Right after the summit meeting, there was a joint statement. In Korean, it was 12 pages of joint statement. There was a long, joint statement. In English, it was a single-spaced 8 pages. But in pages is not important. Volume is not that important. But in the key concept that I sensed, and many people sensed in South Korea, sense that maybe alliance has been also matured. And these two countries are searching for a new partnership for the future, new century. Strategically speaking, South Korea is just, the 1 month earlier that Suga, Prime Minister of Japan, he also had, summit meeting with, President Biden. And Japan's position is like Japan is one of the members of a scrum against China. I think the South Korea is like a running back position. Is one step or a half step behind the scrum line, scrimmage. So it's, I think that Washington, Biden administration seems to acknowledge that South Korea's more flexible, flexibility and maneuverability vis-a-vis China things. But we have already chose the side, because we made alliance. But alliance is not the final terms of the friendship. Maybe we should combine that with that alliance with certain new types of security architecture of the Northeast Asia in the future. Sorry, I feel very dizzy.